will turn 25, and Naomi will turn 27. And Naomi and her husband Ed have not long ago had a daughter, Thea. So we're looking forward to lockdown to end, so we can spend a bit of time with our granddaughter. So that's a bit about me. That's the YWAM stuff. The non-YWAM stuff is this week I bought a motorbike. I don't have a license yet. I'm hoping to pass the test that was cancelled and rescheduled. I'm a passionate Wolverhampton Wanderers football club fan. So if you like Premier League football, you'll love Wolves, and that's my team. And I speak Spanish. There you go.
Great. And you're an avid tea drinker. Let's be honest. If you follow Steve on Instagram, you are going to see many cups of tea.
If you're not a follower of Steve on Instagram, what's the matter with you?
It's good. It's good. Thank you. And Krista?
Yeah, my name is Krista. Thanks, Claire, for having me here and inviting me. So I started my YWAM career in YWAM Restenäs, Sweden in 2006. Gosh, that feels like so long ago. But yeah, 2006, met my husband there shortly after, and then stayed there till around 2015, mostly working with DTS leadership and training, and then slowly transitioned into leadership and more admin-y type roles. Then we went to India for the better part of a year to lead a DTS as we transitioned to England in 2015, where we've been at YWAM Harpenden ever since. And then a lot of my work is my kids. For Claire, who knows, I have 3 kids under 7, and then I have one on the way very soon. So a lot of my work is community oriented with them and with mentoring and discipling informally, and then various admin stuff. But yeah, I'm passionate about mercy ministry, so I try to get my hands in that as much as possible from where we are. And yeah, I'm passionate about discipleship and people, so I'm often seen doing laps with people because that's what I like to do best. So
it's true, dragging a red little Tikes car beside you as well. Good. Well, guys, thank you so much for being willing to come on the panel this afternoon. And I know, knowing both of you, that you both are in your passion. It's not just a passion, but you practice what it means to build community. And so I'm really excited to hear from both of you. I also want to just say, if you're watching with us this afternoon, we are a person down on this panel, and we would love your questions. So there's a chat room, and we want to hear from you. This is your place to ask hard questions of these two. I'll just host the questions to them. So please do. This is about participation from everyone. We want to hear your thoughts and your questions. And so just type them into the chat box, and we will monitor it and do our best to answer those as well. But yeah, let's get stuck in. So as I said, the topic is building authentic community, and we've all kind of explored our articles this month. We've watched the LDX talks. We have watched Jeff on the Leadership Lounge. And that's where I'd love to start this afternoon. I'm just going to throw you right in there, guys. But there's something that Jeff said that has stuck, and it's been kind of toiling in my own mind. And so I'm going to read out something that he said. He said that authentic community has to be built upon a mutual Christ, mutual mission, and rhythms that reflect our values. And if we don't do that, then we become known for simply what we believe, and we miss out on the how to believe it. Another way that perhaps is easier to understand, he says that it's easy to become more in love with the idea of community than it is to practice doing it. So what are your thoughts? I mean, I think how easy is it for us to fall trap to that concept of falling in love with the idea of community rather than practicing it in a mission that talks about community a lot? They both fall silent. It's great.
I've been thinking about this quite a lot, because as we go through our YWAM values, living in community isn't one of them. It's a byproduct of, in some ways, the convenience and the strategic nature of having some sort of critical mass and some synergy. I think it's a very helpful thing, but community in and of itself isn't a value that we have. Working in team is valuing individuals, valuing families, of course. So I think I certainly see it here. There's a very much a utopian idea of what community is like. And when we'll join the community, it doesn't take long for that idea of the idealism of Christian community to fall away, to be replaced with the reality of just doing everything with the same people all the time, which can drive people around a twist, which is a very British phrase, sorry, drive people crazy. So I think there's some idealism mixed into what community is and what people would like community to be. And the question that I often ask people here is, what kind of community do you expect? Because every once in a while we'll say, oh, we're not going to meet together. Oh, we're not going to be on timetable today. We're going to come off timetable because there's something that's come out, some news, some situation. We're going to take some time to pray, or something's happened and we're all going to go out into the local town. And sometimes it can be a response of like, well, how am I going to get all my work done? Mm-hmm. You know, I've got so many things to do. How am I going to get it done? And my question is always, what kind of community are we? Are we a work community, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, that tries to fit in some Christian content because we're a Christian organisation? Or are we a Christian community that's motivated, and the motor, the impulse that we have is time spent with the Lord in prayer and worship and reading the Bible, whatever. And then when we have an opportunity, we do what we call ministry. And I think very often the outworking from the outside, the result would look the same, but it's the motivator, the thing that drives you to make your decisions and determine your priorities that will help to shape the community that you're a part of.
Yeah, that's really good. I've been reflecting over, I think I haven't intentionally thought about, community is something I sort of just do often without thinking about it intentionally. But lately, I think we can all relate, as we've been going through COVID for a year now straight, that I've seen the cracks in community where either the structural, where we've set up, like he's talked about rhythms of community living where we do retreats and stuff, but even just the relational, I see how it's been difficult. And the outpouring of COVID and not being able to connect, be it the heart to heart, the sharing of the joys and sorrows beyond Zoom, which we know has its limitations. And I've been reflecting a lot over when he was sharing about the rhythms and all this stuff, about how important rhythms are important, but how much are they mandated or set by the leadership or by the structure? So even as I was chewing over this, I was thinking how, if I don't feel I have a safe place, or I don't feel that we have enough rhythms, am I creating that safe place for others on the campus? If I don't feel that I am engaging enough with the local community and in the rhythms that are going on broader than YWAM, am I owning that myself? Am I participating in those things, or am I waiting for the structure or the leadership to provide that for me? So a lot of my sort of thoughts started revolving around these three things, and how do we own them as individuals and not put it to a structure or the leadership, which I'm guessing for you, Steve, you're a base leader. I'm sure you get a lot, or I've heard a lot from my husband on leadership team of the base is not providing this rhythm, or the base is not allowing for this. Yeah. Which actually, that's a small part. Yes, you set the culture and the vision and the tone, but it's so much about us creating that in our own lives and then the outpouring of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. About probably it was probably April, May last year, once we kind of got into the 5th, 6th, 7th week of lockdown, and the novelty, such as it was wearing off, and the reality of this not knowing what was coming next was beginning to sink in. We realized that there was some frustration within our community, and there was some lack of understanding of what was going on in the UK. We've got some, non-UK staff members who were getting their information from back home or from other sources, which is perfectly all right, of course, but we are actually here in the UK, so you've got to be rooted where you're living to know what's going on around you. So we took some time to look at some of the implications to us, And once you remove the normal ministry activities that require going out, you're left with a bit of a mundane schedule, because these things that were what people look forward to go out and doing were taken away. And we've over the last year, really, we've explored this idea of what it means to be part of a community without those other things, because really we took the decision early on as a community at Homestead to maintain this sort of like one unit identity. So we've continued throughout lockdown to pray together, to worship together, to eat together, and we've operated as one big family, if you like, with our protocols and risk assessments in place for what we do with, you know, if someone had a positive test or someone contracted the sickness, whatever. But what we identified was, or what we eventually pointed out, I think, was that if you take away the outreach, if you take away the local ministry, actually that's a very small percentage part of the overall week. If you look at the week in numbers of hours and you take away those ministry hours, there's still a lot of hours left, and we have to be able to have a sense of purpose within what we do. So we started revisiting some sort of the old monastic traditions and looking at things like a rule of life. So we instituted a midday liturgy, a midday prayer that we do. We have lunch from 1 till 2, and then at 2 we gather, so that we pray together. And it's a liturgical prayer. It's one that by now it seems like everyone in the community knows by heart, apart from me. I'm not very good at that sort of learning of stuff.
There, Steve, I see.
So you know, I've got it. We've got it accessed, so we can find it in different ways. But we pray together, and it's a really lovely point where we can come together. It's kind of a refocus on why we're here and what we're doing, so that we can go out. And one of the messages that I've been kind of communicating to our community on a regular basis is, you know, Jesus in John 13 says that people will know that we're his disciples if we love one another, not if we go and do lots of stuff. And I think we can easily confuse within our community settings the activity that generates community, which is a part of what we do for sure. But there also has to be a mutual love and respect and affection amongst us, because if not, when we go out, what do we actually offer? And I said this not too long ago. We have a food truck here, which goes into Brighton every Saturday and Sunday and does a hot breakfast, bacon and egg roll for the street community. And we're continuing with that because that kind of charity work is permissible under the regulations here. And I said, you know, if you can go down to do that on a Saturday or Sunday morning, early in the morning, when sometimes it's cold, you know, you've got up early, you're not in the best frame of mind or mood, but you can be polite to all the people that you meet there and loving and kind, yet you struggle with people here in the location that you're living in, that you're sharing space with. I think we've got something the wrong way around. So we've pushed really hard into this idea of how do we generate loving, caring, mutual support and affection amongst us, because anything that we do that goes out from here is an extension of what we're doing individually. And what you said at the end there, Krista, you know, my message to our team here has been, you know, the devotional life of YWAM Homestead Manor isn't set by us having intercession and worship. It's set by everyone in the community bringing a heart of intercession and worship to the corporate stuff. This isn't rocket science. It's not a complicated formula to work out, but we can tend to fall into this. Well, the base needs to provide this, this, and this. So if the base is doing this correctly, then it will be covered. But it's, you know, the base is only as spiritual as the people are spiritual. The practical service on the base depends on the willingness and the initiative and the work ethic of those who contribute to it. The community spirit in us, around us, isn't dependent on having meetings together. It's dependent on me being willing to talk to people and not be on my phone.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating in COVID, actually, that Krista, you talked about how it's revealed cracks, and I think it brings all of those things together in that it's very easy for us to think we have community because we do the same job together or we work on the same project. But the minute you take the work or the project away, suddenly you're not interacting with those people, and you suddenly realize, oh, maybe community was just based on the task. But I find it interesting in this, what Jeff was saying, that it is the mutual Christ, mutual mission and rhythms that reflect values. And I think that often we get stuck in the mutual rhythms and the work practices and those things, and we do those things mutually together, but we haven't built from the values up, you know, and I think that plays into what you're saying too, Steve, with, you know, even just you take away corporate worship or the style of worship or those things. Are we still worshippers? Are we still worshippers when we're on our own? Are we still worshippers when we're just with one other person or on Zoom or you know, and I think that's been the gold, in my opinion, that's coming out of this season, is actually we've had to like really think hard about, what are my values? Do I still believe in community, even if I'm sick in bed and I can't get out and do mission, like in the classic practical way? Or yeah, so it brings to light a lot of hard questions, I think, for us all, right?
There's a word that I've looked at and used quite a lot within some of the stuff that we've done here, and I picked it up from there's an author called Alan Hirsch, who's a missiologist. He's a South African who lived in Australia, is now in the US, I think, but I'd highly recommend a lot of what he says. I think it's very applicable to youth with the mission communities. And he talks about communitas, which is the building of community as you engage in something. It's, you know, all of us have been on some sort of outreach. We've all done a DTS. And very often it's the friendships that we form in those places that become very long-standing. The sort of people that when you meet up with them, you just kind of pick up where you left off because of those shared experiences. Alan Hirsch refers to, you stop being kind of teammates and you become comrades. You know, you've got an aim in mind, whether it's to reach out to an unreached people group or build a house or deliver something. You know, you work together to get the job done. And in that working together, you cover each other and support each other and help each other. And I think sometimes within our YWAM communities, not having an aim or a purpose to aim at all together, we miss out on some of that rubbing shoulders and support. And then the corporate things that come into play become a question of taste and preference rather than urgency and need. And there's always going to be a bit of that. I'm a base leader, and I'll be maybe this isn't the forum for me to say that I don't always like worship or I don't always want to go to intercession, but that's the truth. There are some days I wake up and I'd rather not go into the office because I'm not, I'm just fed up with stuff. But I have to determine, I can't make my decisions based on my choices, my preferences, my likes and my dislikes. My commitment to the Lord is expressed in the place that I'm at, and the place that I'm at demands certain things of me. So I've got to, my wife often talks about how we have to get over ourselves in order to get to God. And there's some very practical stuff about just, not letting situations determine or circumstances determine our responses, which is easy to say. And in any community, we're currently with trainees on DTSs here and staff, we've got some volunteers, we've got, we're not a massive community compared to Harpenden perhaps, but we're bigger than some other places. It's about 40 adults here at the moment and 7 kids under 10. To get everyone in the same place at the same time, in the same frame of mind, is impossible. And we recognise that, and we recognise that people have bad days and some people have good days, and some people are really annoying sometimes, and some people are really helpful sometimes, but we're probably not all of those things all of the time, all at the same time. And we have to create space and have a bit of patience and grace and tolerance for the things that aren't working. And particularly in a situation like lockdown, it highlights all kinds of things that bubble to the surface that maybe weren't there before, frustrations and anxieties and all kinds of things. And we've had a number of members of our team here who've struggled with all kinds of issues. And if they don't feel safe enough in this environment to work them through and get some help and have some space to work them through, then we're also not doing a very good job in terms of what we're able to offer in terms of support.
Yeah. Krista, you said something, you mentioned, about community being the space for both pain and joy. And that's something that came up in one of the articles. And I know Johnny talked with Jen about, you know, community being a place of shelter, and if we can't get that, make space for both joys and pain in our communities, even with it, like with YWAM settings like we have, then how can we create that for, or send people to the nations and go be community if we haven't got it here. Now, I know you as a friend, and I know you in this community, and I've watched you, and I feel like you do that really well. You make space for people's pain and joy, their failures and their successes. But how can you just speak to that a little bit? Like, I think that's a real key part of building authentic community. And yet I feel like often the experience is, if you screw up, or if you feel like you are struggling emotionally or whatever, that you have to come off your job, and then you get sidelined because you're not, you know, we're quite we can easily become quite performance orientated, I think, in highly missional environments. And so, yeah, can you just speak to that a little bit? Because I feel like you're good at that.
The part of community that resonates, I mean, when I was looking at all these different articles, there's so many aspects of community you hit, right? From just having fun together down to, you know, spiritual community in the smaller YWAM community and the bigger. There's so many aspects. But what I was thinking about that they all boil down to is the values of intentionality, sacrifice. And those are two things that aren't comfortable, but they're required if you want to make community. So I'm a very practical person, you know that, Claire. So I tend to always bring it down to, am I willing to walk that with that person? If I want community, if I want personally as Krista, someone to share my joys and my pain, am I willing to walk with my neighbor in that? And I think one of the articles was, or one of the speakers talked a little bit about, you know, the early church and how they shared everything in common. And he talked more about the practical, how they shared everything in common. But I think it was also that they shared each other's joys and sorrows. I think they shared life together. And that wasn't, the early church wasn't a group of people who all loved each other, and, you know, they were all the same personality, same culture. They were more than us, I think, even in YWAM, they would have been a mix. And it took a great amount of intentionality to walk out loving my neighbor every day. You know, it's not a quick one-off prayer. It's an investing of my time. It's an investing of my family's time, inviting people over for meals, going for that walk with the person that is struggling, that maybe you don't know, but you just have to give of yourself. So for me, it's a daily, like they said, not the one-off quiet time. It's that daily going in with the Holy Spirit of, who am I to be intentional in community with today? And asking God to reveal that to me. And sometimes it's someone super random, and sometimes it's a good friend, which makes it easier. But it's that community thinking every day, not just in my, well, Tuesday night we have community. And that's easy to get into that, I think, of just the structured things, but how do I walk that out every day? And I think for even people like me, who I'm not in a leadership, well, I have some stuff, but you know, mostly I'm at home, but community is people like me. Community is the everyone. And if 50% of them are holding back or not engaging with community, then we're not going to have community, because it stems out of individual and our own walk with the Lord and our own struggles and vulnerability with one another, and the one out of everyone choosing to be open and vulnerable and engage with each other. So it's, yeah, for me, it's intentional. I like it too, so that helps. I recognize for everyone it's not as easy, but it is a sacrifice, I think, that we have to do to really partake of the good fruit, you know, that is community that we all desire, I think. So yeah,
upside down value of the kingdom, right? But the thing that doesn't make sense doesn't make sense. That we have to, if we want to have a good friend, we are going to be a good friend. If we want to have community, then we need to be community for other people.
Exactly.
You know, if we want someone to care when we are feeling broken and worn down or tired and disappointed, then we need to care about the person that's feeling that when we don't feel that, you know. And that, it's
about sharing that, you know, together, which is easy.
There's a question here on the chat, guys. It says, I'm just going to read.
Could I just add to what Krista was saying? That the thing about intentionality, I think anything within community life, communication expectations are so easy to be so easy to be missed. We have to be really clear with what we communicate and what we expect, and that those in our communities are clear with what's expected of them, which is, I just go back to saying, you know, we are looking at a rule of life, and we encouraged our staff members to come up with their own. And Joe and I have also written a rule of life for our community, which we're beginning to work through. We've got our job descriptions that talk about what's expected in terms of output, if you like, you know, your participation in making the animal of YWAM function. But then there's this other part, which is the contribution that you make as an individual that feeds into the broader sort of corporate whole. So when we're talking about a rule of life, which kind of defines a little bit some of the kind of person that will make working in YWAM functional for an individual and for a group, because we all have to, you know, YWAM, I think it was Anne Sloan who said to me once, in terms of, you know, like Myers-Briggs stuff, the percentage of extroverts that we have in YWAM is not the normal percentage of extroverts you get in most social groups or workplaces. We've kind of got an imbalance, and part of that is the kind of like the DNA of YWAM. We attract certain kinds of people because of the sort of the profile that we've historically had. But some of those people, if you're a raging extrovert, some of the community aspects really are suited to you, but some of the rhythm and the repetition and the process becomes quite challenging. Yeah. So we have to work hard at being intentional so that we're able to reflect something that everyone can be a part of, irrespective of personality type or calling, specific calling. And I often say to people here, you know, where did God call you to be? Well, at Homestead Manor. So how can you say you don't like this at Homestead Manor? This is where God called you. If you don't like it, talk to God, but don't come and mention it to me. Get in line with what God said to you. If God called you to be at Homestead, then ask God for the grace to get on with what's happening at Homestead. Yeah. That's a bit of a simplified, you know, glib response, but there's something in that, bringing people back to a point, you know, no one pressured you to come here and be part of the community. So why wouldn't you want to be part of the community? Yeah.
And before we actually go to that question, something that you just said that's reminded me of another part of one of the articles. I think it was Rooney, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but anyway, he said something interesting, which has been reflected in our discussion so far, about the leadership of a community is only as good as the community itself. And it struck me because so often in community, it's easy to point the finger to the leaders of a community and say, why is this not happening? And why is that not happening? Or even often it's said, you know, what happens at the top gets reflected into the community. And there's definitely dynamics of that I think is true. But I thought it was interesting that he said that the leadership can only be as good as the community that's going on. And I think that's true. I think that probably breathes a bit of life to our leaders across Europe. If you're struggling with leading your community in this season, it's not all on the leader, right? It comes down to what we're talking about, intentionality in our communities. Like, if you want good community, then be a good community builder. Like, if you are called to a place, then like you say, Steve, you need to ask God for the grace to be there, to keep building community, to keep choosing, to keep living out of values, not just on the task, you know, all of that stuff. And I thought, yeah, I mean, I don't know what you thought, but that stood out to me from his article about leadership teams and community as being just a slightly different angle than what's often talked about.
I think it gives leaders a lot of breathing room or grace that, you know, in my teams, as much as I can set a tone for what I would like it to be or example, at the end of the day, I have to trust that it's God in them, that they're going to live that out, and that it's their responsibility to engage with one another, with God, and then from that place, you know, outwards. But it takes a lot of, I don't know, I feel like a burden off my shoulders that I can't create this. This is up to the individual. I can model it. And I think that's important. And I think that's what Jesus did. but at the end of the day, it's down to the one to make those decisions. And like you said, we were talking about before, it comes from the deeper within our relationship with God. If that's not working out, then it's not going to work out that I'm going to love my neighbor very well, and it overflows. And I can't be held responsible for that. I can question, and I think one of the articles was a bit touching on crucial conversations, which is absolutely essential. I think when we're leading, how do we model that? Do we encourage people to walk in humility? But at the end of the day, I do feel a lot of freedom in that I can't make it. It's between us, each other, and our walk with the Lord to, like you were sort of saying, Steve, you put it back on the person. It's up to each one of them. So it does allow for a lot of grace, I think.
Yeah.
Leading.
There has to be a lot of grace. What we try and do here, or what we've realised we've done over the last several years, is we've created a number of points during the week where the community is able to come together. So we always had, the classic YWAM hour of worship and hour intercession, and we've now moved to having a community tea break in the morning. We don't have coffee breaks in England, by the way. We only have tea breaks. So
Love
we have
it.
a community tea break in the morning. We have this midday sort of liturgical prayer at 2 when everyone gathers, and then people go off to their different areas. We don't have a staff meeting anymore. We have a meeting for news and notices and testimonies and announcements with everyone, both staff, trainees, volunteers, because anything that gets announced is really, it affects the community. So if you're part of the community, you might as well hear it. What used to happen was we'd have a staff meeting, then someone from the DTS staff would go and say everything to the DTS. So I think, what's the point of duplicating that? If we want the trainees to feel part of the community, let them be part of the community. So on a Friday morning, we have 2 hours of tea, coffee, notices, news, a little bit of teaching input, small groups, which are mixed, all of our staff and trainees and volunteers, different combinations to discuss something that is kind of thrown out, always community orientated, to highlight how do we participate in this thing that God's called us to be a part of. And then on Friday lunchtime, we don't have lunch together. We don't have lunch. We fast lunch on a Friday, and we meet for 45 minutes to pray or worship, depending on who's leading. And then in the evening, we have a community meal together. So our Friday is very much a community day. I totted up the total. I reckon we spend somewhere in the region of 8 to 9 hours in one another's company each week, which some weeks on a Monday, I look at that and think, oh, how am I going to get my work done? And what about this situation? But I have to kind of take a step back and think, well, if we want to generate this sense of being part of each other's lives and supporting one another and knowing what's going on, we've got to rub shoulders with each other.
Yeah.
So we create that opportunity, and we're beginning to see that I think it's got some very positive spin-offs, because, relationships are formed, friendships are deepened. It's good for news and catch up and checking out things, and I think it's really helpful.
Yeah, I love that, for the fact that I love the idea of everybody on the campus, whether you're a trainee in a school or whatever language we use, student, whatever, and we break down that wall of like staff, and somehow we're different. We're actually all a body, learning and growing together. And so you're right, like a lot of what happens in our staff meetings probably could just all be, but I think that's a crucial part. I think Johnny talked on that even at their base, just like we've got to build community that's authentic first, and everything else is an overflow of that. And even the other article from Rebecca, I think that lives true then in all the expressions of YWAM that we have. And I loved reading her article where it's totally different to your classic YWAM base like Harpenden or Homestead. They're off in a city working in the spheres, but they found the rhythms that join them as YWAMers, which is based on the values. And so if we get that bit right, then our expressions can be fast, but we're held together around this mutual Christ, mutual mission, rhythms based on values. And I think that's it's really, really interesting to kind of bring all of that together and see how that holds every other part of what we do. let's look at this question. Sorry, here on the side. I'm going to read it because it's long. Thanks, Steve. Communities vary in structure. Some communities, everyone has a joint common room and kitchens. Others where you have separate apartments within the community. Do you think the grace can run out for families and singles? Is there a time limit? What do you think you need in the community in order to stay for a long time?
Jesus.
Ooh. I'm listening. As a mum of 4 kids, Steve, you're the one that's been in here a long time.
I think it's interesting. We've got we went from having one family with young children to another couple who had a child, and then we've had 2 volunteer families join us who've got 4 children between them, and all of a sudden we've got kids playing together and some screaming and shouting and not sharing, and questions of how you manage family life within community life, and there's all sorts of issues around that, which maybe this isn't the discussion to go into. But Joe and I deliberately sat all our families together and said, we just want you to be aware of some things that we learn as parents in the mission with small children, and some of these things might be helpful to you, and please don't think we're picking on anyone in particular, and we're doing it in that sort of passive aggressive way. We're telling you that you're wrong by letting everyone else know what we all think about you. It wasn't that at all. It was, here are some overall sort of parenting hints and tips that we've picked up along the way, and I think it's that kind of that crucial conversation, that idea of acknowledging that things are different for different people. So I know the singles here had some teaching a couple of weeks ago about singleness, and within that, I'm not sure if they got it then, but I've certainly been saying to our DTS leader this last little while, how do we incorporate families into DTS? You know, and it's just a question. You know, how do they fit in? What does it look like? How do we do this? And I think it's the ongoing awareness that not everyone is like us. You know, and several people who know me would probably say, well, thank the Lord for that. But we have to acknowledge one another's life stage. It's, you know, it's ages and stages. It's the acknowledgement of where people are at. And, you know, all of us who are married with kids were married without kids. And before that, we were engaged. And before that, we were singles. And in the majority of cases, for those who are in YWAM with young families, very often, I think in the case of my fellow participants here, it was meeting in YWAM and having children in YWAM. We came into YWAM with kids, but it's been aware of ages and stages. I think not singling people out or highlighting the big push to get married or the big push to have kids. It's how do we have grace with one another in our communities, encouraging people around, sharing, spending time together.
I think that is where community helps soften that. I mean, Claire, in our community, we have a huge number of families. Equally, we have quite a lot of singles in there. Of course, there can be tension. Our lifestyles can be different. You know, our time, what is available is a lot different to a singles lifestyle of staying up late is vastly different than mine right now. But I think it's that element of being open with one another and not assuming. And, you know, when Ewan and I try to engage with the singles, you know, in our house, have them over for meals. And it's that place that they get to see your rhythms as a family and understand that, okay, this doesn't fit for everything that we're doing, and vice versa, and having that grace for one another, that we are the same vision, you know, we love the Lord, but it's going to play out differently in the outworking, and leaving room for that and leaving room for discussions about that. And I think for us, it was a lot about assuming, you know, us making assumptions of why they think the way they do, or, you know, not asking each other difficult questions because we don't want to offend someone, but I'd rather a single came and chatted with me and I'm struggling with this, or vice versa as a family towards singles. So I think it's all comes down to that relationship again, the intentionality of engaging with one another and being open with life struggles. And yeah, sometimes it's hard. I find it hard.
recently in our small groups on a Friday morning, there were two things that we've done. One week I said to folk, we're not going to have any sort of input today, but just in the groups, I wasn't there that week. It was my wife who asked on my behalf. Ask one another your story. How did you end up here today at Homestead Manor? How did you get to be on this DTS? Why did you come to join staff? What made you want to volunteer with Homestead Manor? Listen to people's stories of how they met the Lord and how they ended up here. Partly because if we don't understand people's stories and where they've come from, we have a limited amount of patience and grace for them. But when you begin to hear someone's story, you think, oh wow, the fact that they're here, amazing. Oh wow, you did that. That's incredible. And our perception of who they are adjusts a little bit. And we had another discussion a couple of weeks ago about equity and equality. And maybe did we have that discussion, or did we?
In your head, Steve?
Maybe I think we might have thought this on the DTS when we were talking about. Actually, it was on the DTS. We were talking about relationships, and we talked about equity and equality, and how we don't expect the same things of everyone, but we expect everyone to be able to give what is appropriate for them in the age and the stage that they're at. So our singles, yeah, we will ask you to do maybe a bit more of the washing up or the practical work in the afternoon and the evening, because the marrieds with young kids are trying to kind of calm them down or feed them or get them ready for bed or whatever. So if we understand that me as the base leader, I've got some responsibilities that I have to take care of that no one else is going to do. It's going to be me and Joe that have got to sort this stuff out, because it's part of our role. So it's not that we don't want to do this thing that's going on. It's that we've got to do this thing that you can't do. And when we begin to recognise the difference between the responsibilities and perhaps the responsibilities that we carry and the roles that we have, we can be have a bit more grace and a bit more forbearing for one another. I know then, actually, if I do this, I'm really helping you out. It changes the motivation for what we want to do, and I think that can be a really helpful process.
Yeah, I think it strikes me that it really boils down to communication, and I think that's probably one of the keys to being in the community for the long haul. Communication first and foremost with the Lord, right? Like that we're communicating and we're hearing Him regularly about why we're here and why He's called us to this place, so that we know, if we know the why, then we have much more grace for the things that we might struggle with. But I think I know for myself, living coming from living in a house just in a normal suburb in the USA, and then moving back into a YWAM community like Harpenden, I quickly realized I need to communicate. I am the parent of my family, and my family's needs look different than this family's needs or this person's needs. And actually, the only person responsible for communicating that is me. Like, I can't expect other people to know the dynamics in my family, or I can't expect people to, just because we live in a community with 30 different nationalities, even down to things like how I look after my kids when they're sick is different than somebody from, say, South America looks after their kids when they're sick. And so I just have to be a good communicator. But communication, which is something that was in one of the other articles that I loved, good communication is the ability to listen. And I think that's often the thing we struggle with, right, is being good listeners, especially extroverts. No, I'm just kidding. But I think living in community for the long haul, we have to take responsibility to communicate with others and not be afraid to communicate our needs, our capacities, and have discussions around that, but also to be listening for the stories, listening well to each other, to understand cultural backgrounds, to understand, and for cultural backgrounds coming into a nation, to understand the nation that they're entering and the differences, all of those things. And so that's, I think, I can't remember which article that was in, but I think it might have been Rune was saying that communication is key to community, but communication is listening well. And yeah, like that's what you guys are talking about. So maybe that's one of the keys for the long haul stay in a community setting is.
I think we have to go back to encouraging people to be responsible for their own devotional life. I think we can quite easily kind of individuals can expect things to be provided, and think that the participation in that is my contribution to community. And it's an ongoing reminder for me. Before I was part of YWAM, I was a very active member of my church, involved in leading meetings, leading youth work, leading Bible studies, preaching. And as I see friends of mine who are in roles as pastors and leaders in churches, and particularly during lockdown when they've not been able to meet with their congregation, there is an effort to consolidate that kind of input, create that church content to transmit. And we have such an advantage in our communities to take time to do things that our friends in local church ministry have a limited amount of time to do when they all gather. And I think sometimes we dismiss that as, it can sometimes seem quite slow to get things done in YWAM. I certainly feel that. But actually the depth that we can go to and the issues that we can address and the situations that we can help people kind of come to terms with and relationships that we can be part of healing or restoring is done in an environment where there is this kind of surrounding of lots of personal devotion to the Lord, which helps everyone. But unless we have that individual, my contribution-based worship, my contribution to intercession, my contribution to the community meal, it's not just turning up to eat, it's turning up to take an interest. And I will sit next to someone different. I won't just sit with my friends. And these are things that we're constantly reminding people of. Not everything here is for your convenience. It's for your ability to express your love for the Lord with these people around you. And none of us really choose everyone who's going to be here in our community. It's, they're kind of, sometimes we know who's there and we still come anyway. And then that's your fault if you don't like them. But if you don't know who's there, if you arrive, you've just got to get on with it. Got to go on with those people and make the most of it. We can't be so picky. And I think, society generally gives us so many options to choose and to return and to send back and to exchange, that when we're in a community setting and we find something that's a bit frustrating and difficult, it's actually quite hard to push through that because we're not used to persevering.
Yeah, it's good.
I was thinking on top of this, and it all in lines with this, when I was listening to Jeff, so I've only been at big bases of 80 plus staff, and listening to the YWAM 3.0 model and smaller teams in general, I'm sometimes a wee bit jealous that you can't hide is what I'm observing in those. He was talking about the 4 rooms, I think, of his ideal community or authentic community has a house, and there was a metaphor. And it was a lot about spending time together, both in retreats he was talking about and times of confession and all these things, and times of hanging out. There was a fun room, which I loved. And he had all these rooms, and a lot of it was intentional time together, which in a large base, at least where I've only been at, doing those things corporately as a group with families and individuals and off base and on base people is very hard. You almost end up scheduling them 9 months in advance just to make it intentional. And so I guess the responsibility has to be pushed down, but it's easy to fall through the cracks. So you've got some being very intentional and feeling they have a group or a team that's thriving and they're getting that. And then you have others that are not seen or, don't know how. And I'm almost envious, I guess, of the smaller team ideas and even this 3.0 of that you could get together with your whole team and have a meal or a laugh twice a month or something. I don't know. I wonder if there's something with smaller groupings rather than these mega.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, they're mega, but it is easy to fall through the cracks, I think, in these bigger YWAM campuses like ours.
Yeah. But part of it, I wonder, is to do with how we word things, because when we talk about campus, we create an idea of what we expect. And most people who come to a campus come to study.
Yeah.
And you separate class from social,
yeah.
And it reinforces perhaps some of the differences that we have from our education background, from our country. It was Alejandro Rodriguez from YWAM in Argentina, who for years was talking about missionary communities. Instead of calling us bases or campuses, we should talk about ourselves being missionary communities. And for a while, I didn't quite poo-poo what he said, but I was like, oh, kind of, here we go again. But actually, the more I've been involved in leadership, and since we've been here at Homestead, when people locally talk about YWAM, for me to say we're a base or a campus doesn't really mean anything. Yeah. So to talk about us being a Christian community, it actually has some meaning and some history within our evangelical Protestant tradition. It creates the idea of a religious order, and I think there are so many parallels between sort of the monastic traditions and what we do, that if we ignore them, we do so at our peril, I think, because we can glean so much that can be so enriching. And that central focus on working together for what the Lord's called us to, and training can be a part of that, of course it can, and outward focused ministry and inward focused stuff, whatever it is, it can all be part. But our words dictate very much how we interpret and what we think about the things that we're involved with. So if we're constantly saying campus, then we're going to create the idea of an education establishment where one of the first DTSs me and my wife led was in Argentina, and we had a guy come with his cousin, and that the first weekend I was just chatting to a few people. What are you doing at the weekend? And this guy and his cousin and two others. Oh, we're renting a car and we're going to the beach. And I'm like, the beach is like about a 5-hour drive from where we were, and we're like, okay, can we unpack that a little bit? And the two of them had come with the idea that DTS would be some classes during the week and weekends would be free. And we're like, actually, we're doing something on Saturday. We've got an event on Saturday morning that we'd like you here for, and we've got a meeting on Friday night, and then on Monday morning this is taking place, and we're expecting you to go to church on Sunday. And it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. Now, I think we'll probably all maybe communicate a bit more what our DTSs are. Whether people read it, listen to it, pay attention to it, is a whole other story. But if we create the expectation that the community looks a certain way, and we expect this of those people who participate in community, we can begin to undo some of the misconceptions of community even before people join it. But it's a slow process. We've been here 8 years, and it took us probably a good 4 or 5 years to figure out what is the potential of community, and what could this community look like, and how relevant should we be? Do we need to be? Are we locally? So there are all sorts of questions, and I think that ongoing reflective process of asking questions is a really helpful one. And sometimes we fall out of that because they're leading this and they're leading that, and I'll just do what I'm told. And I think, going back to what Steve said, how do we encourage people to be around longer? Part of it is including people in the processes that we have. Part of it is giving people responsibility. The proverbial glass ceiling, if it's there, will stop people's growth and development, either individually or within the structure that we ourselves have created. So what can we do to help people develop their gifting and their skills and their interests so that they would want to continue to be part of the community? But I think ongoing commitment to YWAM doesn't come from lots of projects, although that can be a part of it. I think it comes with when you kind of feel this heart connection with those around you and the place that you're in and the sense of commitment to the Lord. When all those things kind of converge, I think that's when some sort of long-term or longer-term commitment comes. But if we aim for long-term commitment by pinning people down to schools, it kind of works, but you miss out on something, I think.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, Krista, having been in a pioneering setting in a very small team and building, it is drastically different than being in this setting. And I've often I've been in 2 larger communities and 1 pioneering team, and I think it's fascinating because the small team, you build deeper relationship very quickly. You can't hide, and therefore you have to learn really quickly how to love people that you don't get on well with, that kind of dynamic. and yet in that setting you often crave the slightly more corporate, those kind of dynamics. And so there's like, and then here in a larger community, I think it's very easy to feel lonely in this setting, because people make assumptions that you have your people and those kind of things. And in some ways, probably some of my loneliest years have been in a large YWAM base, because the assumption is you've got friends and you know, those kind of things. But I think it is an interesting question for us as large communities about what it means to be connected, because sometimes the expectation is that we would all be connected at deep levels, and that's impossible with 100 people. You can't all be, you know. And so how do we create these kind of almost small teams within a large community, but making sure no one is left alone? I think those are really hard questions to unravel in the practicalities. But they come back down to the same
proactive in your interaction with those around you. You know, I said we're about 40 at the moment, 40 adults, and it's quite obvious when someone isn't around for something. So, you know, I've had people say to me, oh, you know, so and so wasn't at this thing, or I've said to my wife, you know, where was so and so, and our first default can be to make a judgment based on something that's happened, you know, months ago, or years ago, or we're trying to get to the point where we think, you know, believe the best of someone, that something's happened, but ask them, you know, have a conversation. Oh, hey, I missed you the other day, or we you know, I didn't see you at this thing that we do. Everything okay? And I think sometimes even just that little question can seem a bit daunting, because our sense of community is based around events rather than relationships. So we have to kind of get over ourselves and say, you know, hey Claire, I missed you the other day. Where, you know, everything all right at home, or, you know, were you busy with the kids? And run the risk of saying something that might cause a reaction. You know, and I think if we can't do that in our YWAM communities, which really are quite safe communities, where the, you know, the foundation is our personal devotion to the Lord and love for one another. If we can't do it there, you know, we can't. What have we got to take out anywhere?
Yeah, so good. I am aware that our time, as we could keep going, I feel like, look at it, it's so good though, it's so rich. And I think hopefully this is just the start for people. Like, we'd love you to keep these conversations going wherever you are, whether you're in a small team or a large team. We are definitely, it's a growing experience, right? It's an unraveling. It's not like we arrive at an excellent community just like that. We are constantly moving and growing and learning together and getting it wrong, and yet that's the invitation to move deeper and expand our hearts for one another and for nations. And I loved what Jose said in his, when he talks about, you know, this isn't something that we have to figure out on our own. Like, I always find that if I study those 12 disciples and the Jesus model of community, it blows my mind away when I look at the disciples and where they came from and their backstories, and how they still managed to build community, gathering around a table and doing the simple things like breaking bread together, you know, going fishing together, like the things that the glue for them was found in really simple acts of being together. And I think that's clear from our discussion this afternoon, is there's just power in rubbing shoulders together, finding rhythms to help in that dynamic where it's not natural necessarily, but ultimately it always comes from our individual heart to choose that, to want those things. And as we bring those things, then we create those things with other people. And so, yeah, good stuff. And I just want to say thank you to both of you for giving up your hour this afternoon to join the discussion. And we just appreciate what you both have brought, and appreciate all the contributors on our articles and videos too. It's such good stuff.
Could I recommend a book?
You sure can.
I read this last year. If you're interested in the idea of rule of life, The City is My Monastery by Richard Carter, who's an Anglican priest in London. He moved from, I think, from the Seychelles to central London, and had to look at what community meant in that environment. And it's a book that touches on some of his journey, reflections and story. But as you go through it, I found as I went through it, there were a lot of parallels to looking at community within a youth with a mission context. And I think this idea of a rule of life is one that, if you're not familiar with it, investigate it a little bit, because I think it will add a richness to you as an individual. But if you as a community can explore the idea of a rule of life, it can bring a richness to your together stuff, which I think you'll find beneficial.
Yeah. It's I think it's John Mark Cromer as well, who has he's done the rule of life exploring, and he has an amazing workbook that you can download. If you search John Mark Cromer on Google, you'll find it. But he's got a phenomenal workbook that you can work through, that I started to work through, and I just found it so helpful, really good questions, and it really helped me translate it into, so good stuff. Thanks for that, Steve. Appreciate it. All right, everyone, we hope you have a wonderful afternoon wherever you're joining us from. And this is it from us on the discussion panel. See you later.
Bye-bye, Europe.
Bye.
Bye.